Hi. Hello. I've been getting a lot of messages on I want to say it's community, and people have been chatting about certain things. And one of the messages that keeps coming up is people are saying, what's the difference between intuitive, psychic, and medium? So I'm going to talk about those three things. I'm going to give you a little bit of insight, and I'm also going to share a couple stories about my experience with that wild ride. Okay, so the first thing is with intuition. Everyone's intuitive. Every single person has an intuition. Everybody. And when I say that, intuition is an energy or a wisdom we all have. And I feel like it's our soul energy. It's the energy that connects us with God, if you will, your higher power, whatever you want to call God. And I believe it connects us. Now, when I say intuition, that's where the idea of mother's intuition comes from. You won't hear anybody saying, oh, mother's intuition is evil. No, it's actually saved children's lives. So our intuition is actually something that supports all of us in our life. So this is something we all have. It is a given. Now, here's the thing. People say, well, how do I trust it? Well, I don't think, in all the years I've done intuitive work, and I'll be talking about that in a moment, I don't think I've ever really trusted it, in the sense that I defined it as that my intuition is always speaking to me, but it is my brain's job, my thinking logical brain, to always shut down my intuition to keep me safe. Because remember that when people come up with intuitive hits, or they have, readings or what have you, people are skeptical. I've had people go, there's no such thing as psychics, and I'm going to introduce you to the skeptic. And I'm like, I don't really need to meet that person, but knock yourself out. The point I'm making is that I think the real thing is that our brain is always trying to keep us safe and help us look good. So our brain is going to come up with stupid excuses. It's going to also prevent us from really going and taking that risk in that new career, that new job, that new relationship, whatever it is, because our brain has every record of every hurt we've ever had. So when we have an intuitive hit and go, this is something I want to do, even a New Year's resolution, we go, yeah, I'm doing this, I'm in it, I'm surfing, I'm in my new year. And then all of a sudden your brain goes, whoa, 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 whoa. Remember that time you left that job and you were homeless for 3 months? So what happens is your mistakes get repurposed in your brain as things to save you. And that's why you'll hear people argue for their own limitations. So when we talk about intuition, our intuition is always speaking to us, but it may speak to us in ways that are not necessarily clear if we haven't trained it. Now, I want to say that's when we get into psychic. Psychic is someone who has taken their intuition and trained it for that purpose, to train it to see beyond, to work with their intuition at such a high level and such a deep level that they're going to use it in that arena. Now, I want to back up and say, remember I just said everybody's psychic, or not psychic, sorry, intuitive. Now, intuition in itself is kind of like, it's kind of like secret sauce. You could take that secret sauce, which is your intuition, and you can put it on many different things. Let me give you an example. Police officers, they go and they do all this training. They learn how to handle a gun, how to handle a perp, what to do in certain situations. They get trained. And then they get out in the field and they have to literally forget all that training and remember every bit of it in action. So what happens is they can't be, okay, do this. They have to, and I happen to love, this is where true crime comes in. I think detectives are some of the best intuitives and the best psychics to watch, because we're watching these guys and gals and we're going, how do they do that? And it's a skill. Absolutely. If you look at the interrogation of like a Chris Watts, you're watching these interrogations, and people are always saying to me, because they know I work in this spiritual stuff, and they're always going, come on, what's with the true crime thing? And I'm like, have you ever watched the guy who does Murder Chose Me? He's brilliant, because he knows He's like, it chose me, man. And if we said that, like people say, well, how come you read cards? Well, it chose me. When we look at it that way, we start to understand that people train in an area, they're using their intuitive skill. That secret sauce is getting used in police detective work. When we really, one of my first books that I ever read about this stuff, which really I loved, was John, forgive me, Homicide Hunter. Was that it was the book about, not Homicide Hunter because that's Kenda, but it was the book, forgive me, I can't remember the name, but it was about the behavioral science unit at Quantico and the FBI. Now, the behavioral science people are taking their intuition and pulling apart patterns that work. So what do you think happens when those patterns come up and they see this woman, victim, man, victim, whatever, died in this particular way, was positioned like this, had a cloth put over their head. These are the things that happen. Those are all the things that they learned in their training. And now their training has been placed into that intuitive bank. It's like those slots of memory. It's like, so when they look at something, what's going through them, and it's kind of what we see if you watch Joe Kenda, right? If you watch Homicide Hunter, which is so great because, they show the image of Kenda, the young Kenda, walking to the scene, and you see everything come away, and he's watching everything unfold. That's kind of how intuition is. He has been trained to see certain things. Now, that's what intuition is. We can apply the same intuition to a doctor. How can you explain a doctor who's walking by in the ER, who sees someone who's in distress, runs over and shoots an EpiPen in them, and that person survives, and everybody around them is going, how'd you know? It's because that person is on hyper intuition. They're on hypersensitivity. And that's what police do. It's the same thing with intuitives. It's the same thing we do. So when I teach people, when I'm training people, I'm really teaching them, and I'm going to give you some ideas of what I'm talking about, because I teach, obviously I'm teaching to focus the tools on a specific thing, but a couple things of deciphering the messages your intuition sends you. How the brain shuts down intuition by sending you certain messages that will help you look good, right? So some of the things that we learn, and I'm not going to, let's see, getting the intuitive meaning of something. Okay, so what happens is even when we watch somebody like Joe Kenda, and I'm using, again, Homicide Hunter because I think he's great. A lot of these guys are great, but I think it's great to watch that kind of thing when he goes, my. And it's kind of the same thing in a funny way, for me with my intuitive stuff of like, when someone calls me on the radio and says, does he love me? And I'm like, really? Like, you need a therapist, not an intuitive, not a psychic. You don't need a reading. So a lot of times I'll say to somebody, you already have it in control, because I don't feel it's going to help them. It's kind of like if you take the association with someone who has spent their life focusing on developing their intuitive side, you're going to find someone who's very evolved in certain areas. Here's the difference. What I've learned, and this is where behavior has really helped me, and studying a lot of cases with behavioral science, that fascinates me, because when these guys and gals decipher the behavior of what's going on and they can see the patterns, they're seeing behind it. Now, we don't say, wow, that behavioral science person from Quantico, that's the devil's work. But they're doing something very similar. They're using their intuition to help people. And really, they're using it for good. And so I think the assumption of somebody would be using their intuition for evil, well, that's what criminals do. They have developed it. I mean, how else can you look at, I've always said, serial killers must be the busiest people in the world because they have figured everything out. So their whole intuition has worked around not getting caught, and they laugh when they don't get caught. I mean, if you look at like a Jeffrey Dahmer who kind of went, I was right there and they didn't get me. It was like, and a lot of these people that are serial killers or what, they're using that energy, that focus to feed into a madness, an internal madness, and it feeds into it and it quenches it and it quenches it and quenches it. So when we look at raising our vibration, people talk about vibration. When we look at the horrifying things that police officers and detectives have seen in their life, it really, they have to just almost in a funny way shut down. And in readings, I call it neutral observer, because the neutral observer doesn't not have feelings. In other words, I may be able to sit back. It's not like I don't have feelings. Like when someone says, you're crazy, you're this, you're that. Sure, I have feelings, but I also am listening to the words they're saying. In other words, are they saying something that is valuable for me? Or are they saying something that's just, to be mean and to just shut something down, shut down their own fears? Well, there is a difference in that sense. So when we use neutral observer, it's not that I'm not feeling something, it's that the observer says, oh, that's interesting. And that's what police officers do, which is why I love them. I love law enforcement. I'm fascinated by their jobs because I think they look at things and they just they have a way of listening that is extremely profound. And so when we see these interrogations, and I'm using the Watts example, the Chris Watts interrogations, because we have seen all of them. I mean, think about it. This case was really open to us. So when we look at, let's go back to intuition, and again, psychic, right? And mediumship. All right. So I'm going to talk about mediumship a little bit as well when I talk about people who've crossed over. And there are so many people who go, that's not true. And it's like, okay, it's not true for you. That's fine. Like, don't listen then, But here's the conversation that I want to have with you. So let's look at the Watts case in terms of intuition, psychic, and mediumship. All right. And there are people coming out of the woodwork with it, but I'm going to define those three things for you right now, as I've started to a little bit in this. So the first thing is, obviously, we look at this as intuition. What did Chris not have? That's right. He did not have an intuition. He did not use his intuition. He used trickery. Now, what happens is, and when people talk about the devil and, manipulating, that's trickery. That's not intuition. Intuition is the biggest part of ourselves. It's the part of us that really loves what we're doing or wants to get to the bottom of something and wants to bring forth the best of the circumstance. So when we look at that definition, we can see that police detectives do that. They want to bring the best of the situation. They see the worst of civilization. But luckily, most of those people, not serial killers, but like people like Chris Watts, you get the feeling that his plan was just to come back and clean up. He did not really use his intuition. He was not planning anything. He didn't really have a sense of, and let's look at it this way, this guy had no intuitive wisdom whatsoever. He had no idea. He had lost the compass of right and wrong. And unfortunately, I'm not giving him like the insanity thing at all. I'm not. What I'm saying is that he does not fit into these because he was so busy trying to make up a story that he lost his intuition. Now, by the way, when I'm teaching people to read cards, I talk about that particular thing. The way that works is that when people, because your intuition's like the internet, right? It's clicked in, and then there are times it just goes away. Like all of a sudden you're like disconnected. Have you ever had the internet go down and you're like, oh, So when you're when you're working intuitively with somebody and all of a sudden you lose the intuition, a lot of people who don't know or have not been trained will start giving advice, and they'll start saying, well, you should leave him, or you should do this, or you should do that. To me, that's not intuitive guidance. Intuitive guidance is opening the space for somebody to find their own answers. And that's what the interrogations are about. We call them interrogations, but we are really watching intuitive guidance at the highest level. Because when we watched the, and forgive me because she was so fantastic. I know there'll be somebody else who says, this is her name, I already told you. The gal who did the lie detector test with Chris, and I want to say the CBI folks, the cops, each one of them were using their intuitive energy as a guide. Now think about this. What did they do? They guided him with their training to find his truth, to get at the truth. And even though it may have appeared at moments like they planted the idea, like she said, well, do you think Shanann maybe hurt the kids? And she planted that idea so he could have a way out to incriminate himself. Because as we all know, if we're true crime, addicts a little bit, we insinuate and put ourselves in those situations, right? We kind of like, not we, but the criminal will often go back to the scene of the crime. And that's why Chris Watts had to put himself back in there if he was guided to it. Now, here's the thing that I find with intuitive work. One of the things that I find is that when people are looking for intuitive guidance, it's really just to remind them that they have that connection with God. They have their own relationship, and they need to just come back to that track and find it for themselves. I think that a psychic is someone who has trained enough in that area that we do see things, yet I don't know that it's healthy to predict. Now, here's what I want to say. I really don't like to read young people. I don't think it's healthy. I think the best thing I can do with someone who's young is, if they're suffering in some way, guide them back to a therapist or an adult who can help them. Or, I just think it's kind of, I just don't find it responsible, is what I'm saying. So here's what, and by the way, that's not a condemnation of other people who do this work. I'm only speaking for myself. So, because people were asking me, why do you have these books or these cards? Oh, I'm using the cards to pile up so why do you have these books behind you? Why do you have the Chakra Wisdom Oracle cards? What is that about? Well, one of the things that I noticed is that everyone has a different gift with their intuition. So what happens is your intuition is going to be sending you a message, and your brain will go, no, that's stupid. Like your intuition will be like, I really want to write that book. And your intuition says, yeah, there's something there. And your brain goes, oh, do you know how much work that's going to take? And your brain goes, all right, just do a first draft. So what happens is you've got a million first drafts out in the world because your brain kind of goes, okay, it doesn't matter. But when you really start training in it, your brain is going to go, what, are you kidding? You can't do this. I can't tell you how many times I've been in the middle of a book when I went, I can't write this. Well, what are you talking about? You're being paid to write it. And so there's a fear that comes up that's natural with our intuition, and we're really living it. We kind of have to bring ourselves back to our own inner peace, and that does take training. That's why people do meditation. That's why you're seeing so much more of this going on. And when you watch the Chris Watts interrogation, you're watching these people who have been highly trained to intuitively focus on behavior in such a way that they know that he is giving every indication of wanting to spill the beans. And all they have to do is gently prod him, because this man has no real friends. I guarantee that the closest he ever got to anybody and in his life was probably in those interrogation rooms with those cops. He probably felt more understood than any other time in his life. People who work intuitively and really hone their gifts, like cops, like FBI agents, and I'm saying law enforcement, like firemen, like doctors. You have ever felt that way with a doctor where you went, wow, that guy was really brilliant? And he wasn't always the nicest guy, but or gal. They were someone that knew their stuff. Those are people that intuitively, even if they're kind of mean, they can be very intuitive. And sometimes I find that people who are highly intuitive have to be mean. There's so many people that kind of come over and go, this is like, you're mean. It's like, okay, fine, I'm mean. And I think that we're living in a time right now where everybody's kind of, I want to say, harping on the anger, because the anger is the only emotion that's being listened to and being feared and being acknowledged. We're not acknowledging the love. We're not. And there's love all around us, but we're not doing it. Let's get to mediumship. So now we've looked at the intuition. We've looked at the fact that a psychic, a doctor, a lawyer, these are all things that require training. A lot of work is done in these particular areas, but how many people know that the College of Psychic Studies in London was, one of the founders was Conan Doyle, right? Is that his name? Yeah, Sherlock Holmes guy. What I'm saying is true crime and intuition and psychic premonitions and seeing dead people, these are all tied into true crime. So when we look at honing our intuition, everyone who's into this is like excited because they're seeing things. And yet we refuse in some ways to see the very issues in our own life. So what makes us better and better and better as an intuitive is to trust what we came here to do. So, when I see an artist, I don't know if you've probably had this happen where you see these, like, even on the internet or YouTube, you see these people draw these incredible pieces of art and you go, oh my gosh, that's like, how did you do that? I draw stick figures. Like, how did you go like this with this and make it beautiful? That's intuitive guidance. That's where we go deep inside and we follow the love. Intuition at its highest form can only be tapped into when we fall into that part of ourselves. And I know you know what I mean. It's that part of us that's that highest good. It's that part of us that loves some other person just because we want to love them. Have you ever let someone ahead of you in line? Have you ever been in a toll booth? I know I've done this, where I paid for the guy behind me. Or, and they're like, what happened? Or I've been in a restaurant where I said, the next person who comes up and orders this kind of coffee, I want you to buy that for them. And they're like, okay. And so we become kind of like compatriots in doing good. And so that's why pay it forward became so important. That's why we're forgetting that we have such an againstness now. We're forgetting that a lot of this work is grounded in doing God's work on this earth. It's not just about, God doesn't want us living in fear. God wants us living in love and in compassion for each other. And this is how I see it. Let's talk about mediumship. One of the powerful things about mediumship, and I think that we've seen in history some fakey fakes, okay? There are some really fake psychics, mediums, and unfortunately, those people get such press that it's like, see, you shouldn't listen to those people. But what about the cops who abuse people, or they murder people, or they do crimes? Well, that doesn't make all cops bad. So the thing is that why is it we have to judge someone who's doing that? I think we fear what we don't know. And I think that's what bullying is. And it's interesting because I talk about it in here and I want to share this with you, and then I'm going to continue and finish up with mediumship. So, and I'm looking for it here. I think patterns is what I say. Okay. Okay. So one of the things that I worked with somebody on was in a particular, I want to say, intuitive class, she picked a card, and the card was the workaholic. And so she said, when I was working with her, she looked at the card workaholic and said it was wrong. And it wasn't until we got to the antonyms. So I work a lot with what opposes exposes. So when we say something's wrong, what's the antonym? Well, the antonym is right. So when we look at right, she said, oh, that was big in my family if you weren't right. So we're like, what does that mean? And we go deeper. So we kind of, excuse me for saying it, drill down, right? so when I said to her, well, how does it feel to say the word wrong? She said, well, it means I'm right about myself. She instantly saw her own upset with the card or the meaning of the word that stemmed from the meaning she'd made of the word herself and the importance of it around being right. So what I'm saying in this is that there's a lot at stake today in being right. And I think that when I see people who get very much into their upset on some of these posts, immediately it's in all caps, you're wrong. And it's like, wow, wow. Like, who drank all your milk, you know what I mean? And put the carton back empty this morning. So let's talk about mediumship. And I know I talked a little bit about that, but part of what I'm trying to show to all of you is how these two worlds actually do come together. Our intuition and the fascination with how law enforcement actually solves crimes. So I think that there are those of us who can talk to the dead and who do hear things. Now, I want to say, for the record, it isn't my thing. Like, I don't just sit and do mediumship. I know a few people who do it who are very good. And then I know people who I kind of go, like they have unresolved issues in their own life. And unfortunately, that is the problem when we look at, forgive me for putting it this way, bad cops, bad lawyers, bad doctors. It's because they have issues underlying the work they're doing that are unresolved. And the same is true for psychics and intuitives. And that's why, for me, the most important part about this work that I do is really about, I'm less woo and more you. It's really about understanding how our intuition works and how we are in the world so that we can support others in finding their way. And in my world, it's about finding their way back to their own faith. And faith in God, faith in your own choice of God, really is, in a sense, what all of this is about. And if you really talk to some of the amazing detectives out there, the really, really good ones, they have a super strong faith. And it's really amazing to see the faith these guys and gals have. So I am going to say that mediums, I believe that they can open up a channel and they hear things that they can then share with someone. When my father died, and I'm going to wrap with the story, I was very distraught when my father died. And my car that I'd had for 14 years died. And my father my father and I had bought it together. And before he died, he gave me some money. And he said, here's some money because you're going to need a new car at some point. What are you going to buy? And I said, I'm going to buy a Mercedes. I was like, what, in my 20s, 30s. And I said, I'm going to buy a Mercedes. And he said, they're expensive. And I said, I know. And I went, okay, So the point is, when he died and my Honda died and I was just left bereft, I had saved up quite a bit of money and I went and I bought myself a Mercedes. Now, I'd never driven a car like that. I'd never been in anything so extravagant. I was used to my Honda, I was like a Honda girl, And so here I was behind the wheel of the Mercedes and I kept looking at the symbol that in those days it was up on the car. And I was like going, I keep thinking I'm in a Honda. But that day that I drove home, I was living in California and I had to drive over Mulholland Drive. I took Laurel Canyon, I took Mulholland. I decided to drive on Mulholland. And when I came to a certain stoplight in Mulholland, I had the sunroof open. I was playing one of my favorite songs, Bryan Adams, Summer of '64. I don't know the right title to that book, but that song, but that was the name, that was one of the lyrics. And I was making a left onto Mulholland Drive, and out of the corner of my eye, and like this car handled like brand new, it handled like a dream. I was making that left and I felt like $1 million in that moment. And I saw my dad out of the corner of my eye sitting next to me and going, wee, and it was like, and I looked, and of course no one was there, but it was in my mind's eye. I thought I imagined it. And yes, I thought I imagined it, but I felt good knowing my dad was with me. There was that energy. And I started subsequently after that, over the next few weeks, I went into a deep depression because I really missed my dad. And I found these two intuitives, I want to say mediums, and I went to see them, and one draws a picture and the other talks to the dead person. And in those days, I don't remember much of the session, but I remember toward the end of the session, and it was not prompted, he said, "Oh, by the way, that day on Mulholland Drive, in the car, your dad is telling me he was there with you." And that was when I just got truth bumps up and down, and I went, cool. And I have to tell you, from that moment on, I was at peace. Because when people say to you they'll always be with you, and especially if you lose someone you love dearly, you don't believe them. I didn't believe them. They're not with me. He's dead. What are you talking about? But I remember that moment when that medium said that to me. And you know what? You can debunk all you want. You can go out there and say it's ungodlike. But you know what? It was the thing that kept me going, that has allowed me to write my books, that has allowed me to understand that we're never alone, that God's always with us, and that brought me back to my faith. So you may say, or someone may say, that mediums or psychics or what have you are evil. You know what? What I think is evil is anyone who tries to take someone's dream from them. And that's why I'm fascinated by people who do the job of catching the people who are dream killers. So that's what true crime is to me. And that's what those three things mean for me. And I hope you're having a really blessed week. And I will see you very soon. Much love, everyone. Thank you for joining me today.